There are loves that die with a signature on a divorce document. And then bam! There are those that never really leave, however many years go by, or how many lives are there after that? Like, the world remembers Richard Harris. Brave booming voice, performances, and the larger-than-life famous repute which attended him from Dublin to Hollywood. He was the actor who seemed impossible to control. He drank with legends, defied all expectations, and embraced a life that frequently felt like dramatic as the characters he played on the monitor. To millions he was a man who answerable to nobody. But underlying that image was a calmer reality. Long air, the late-night headlines, the awards, and the stories that wove into Hollywood myth. There was this woman who knew Richard Harris before he was famous. Changed him. She was looking at an ambitious young actor chases a goal that seemed virtually impossible. There she stood, next to him as success came faster than each of them had ever dreamed. Together they made a family and welcomed 3 sons, and dreamed of a future which seemed unbreakable. Then fame altered all. The never-ending film sets the parties and the constant transit above the rising dependence of Richard on alcohol progressively built space between that. No longer bridge love alone. Why? Was once brimming with hope, became clouded with disappointment, heartbreak, and choices that neither of them might unmake. In their marriage, ended finally. Many thought it was the end of their tale. It was not. As the years went by and Richard Harris was growing older, the confidence which had formerly began to give in to the contemplation. The man that had died. The decades of living at full throttle began expressing more truly of the life he lived, the faults he had made, and the folks he'd injured in the meanwhile. Of all those memories, one name came back again and again. Elizabeth. No. Because she had been at his side forever, but because she was the ideal of the. Sometimes he wished he had life more protecting, took care. Even though their marriage was finished, their respect never totally disappeared. Neither the affection done. This is the tale of Richard Harris. Not only the renowned actor, world admired, but the man who found it far too late that success can substitute for many things, but can never replace the person who once was, believed in you when no one else did. Richard Harris was born on 1 October 1930, Limerick, Ireland. A huge Catholic household where discipline, heritage, and hard-nosedness shaped daily lives. He was one of 9 youngsters growing up in a home where the focus was contested, unavoidable, but family ties were nevertheless strong. His father, Ivan Harris, owned a thriving flower company and gave the family a happy childhood, whilst his mother, Mildred, advocated warmth, togetherness, even with the needs of the. Being a young man, with so many children, Richard's highest hope was not acting. He wanted to become a pro rugby player. Athletic, charismatic, and ultra-competitive. He seemed set for a career on the area. But then everything changed when he acquired TB in his later years. Teens months of forced recuperation. And told his sporting future was over. He found himself in front of an uncertain times ahead. And through those long months, books and theater become a unexpected sanctuary. What started as a inquiry gradually become a passion. Harris, intent on remaking himself, eventually joined the London Academy of Music and Drama. Consequences being rejected elsewhere, he labored furiously to prove he was one of them, building a compelling voice and magnetic screen presence that would later develop into his trademark. Long before people constantly told me success came, him charming, smart, extremely loyal, and cannot be dismissed. But below the confidence was someone pushed by an perpetual need to prove himself. It was in the early years when he met Elizabeth Rhee Williams, daughter of David Rhee Williams, a Welsh politician. Not like the gorgeous women who would have later encircle Hollywood stars. Before Richard's life was touched by Elizabeth, he was changed by international stardom. She spotted an up-and-coming actor trying to make a name for himself instead. More than the celebrity he would become. Turn into. Married in 1957 when Richard's career was just getting started. Gather momentum. Their affair, produced in an era riddled with optimism, uncertainty, and hard work. Instead of red carpets and premieres, Elizabeth was always the center of attention. His life, which is more and more unpredictable, helping him through auditions, financial uncertainty, the long term. Years before he became part of the UK most famous actors, not one of them might have understood that the success in itself had fantasized about will someday become the greatest threat to their marriage would ever have to face. All of it changed in the early 1960s. Nearly. Richard Harris became one of the overnight the most recognized actors to come from Britain and Ireland. His powerful performance in This Sporting Life earned his first Academy Award nomination and established him as one of the most theatrical performers of his own persuasive generation. Audiences admired the intensity he brought to every part. Directors found an actor who could mix fragility with explosive feeling, making even severely defective, unforgettable characters. Hollywood instantly took notice. Films such as A Man Called Camelot, Heroes of Telmar, Horse, and later The Field broadened his multinational name. His depiction, Camelot and King Arthur, laid bare a distinct side of his talent to show he had not simply dramatic power, but and a surprising musical ability. Through Richard Harris, end of the 1960s, was no longer just an actor. He'd had rise to become one of the greatest stars of the silver screen. Extraordinary achievements, opportunity, but it also brought temptations that were much more impossible to ignore. Richard hugged famous lifestyle with astonishing enthusiasm. Late evenings, fancy parties, luxurious hotels, and perpetual gatherings. Actors become his fellow actors' life. Everyday grind. His reputation of being heavy. His drinking rose almost as fast as repute on the screen. The newspapers were desperate. Reported stories of inappropriate conduct. Friends often called him smart, generous, funny, and totally unpredictable after a few beverages. But behind the headlines, another narrative in the writing. Home. Elizabeth had their 3 sons growing up: Jared, Jamie, and Demaya, whilst Richard spends increasingly more time between cinematic productions. The distance was no longer measured solely in miles. The slow demands of celebrity produced an emotional schism that, nor when had they expected. They have been married for years. Richard rarely ceased working. Successful every film resulted in another offer, another country, and another manufacturing timetable. He thought he was constructing a brighter future for his family, but the price was clearer and clearer. The husband that used to have normal hopes with Elizabeth was slowly turning into a man flooded with international stardom, infinite public display, and personal prodigality. To the outside world, Richard Harris seems to be enjoying a remarkable dream in his own home. The basis of the life he loved best were beginning to break. First of all, Richard didn't believe it, nor did Elizabeth. Their marriage was in serious danger. As countless couples under the strains of they hoped that the fast-changing life, the tough times would go past, but prosperity had brought more than hectic lives. It also had highlighted Richard's vulnerabilities. Alcohol, which had formerly been a casual indulgence, became a constant friend. Long evenings often turned into early morning mixing in film production. Social gatherings and social events became chances for still more drinking. Richard himself would subsequently concede that there were years in which he appeared resolved to live without limitations, thinking tomorrow would always provide a chance to make another thing straight. The truth for Elizabeth was much less glitzy than the newspapers had hinted at. The people mythic growth she celebrated Richards was striving to maintain stability for her 3 little boys. She carried a lot of the duty at home, and witnessing the guy she loved change more and more, obsessed by a lifestyle that did not leave much room for family life. The emotional gap had grown over time. Instead of suddenly, there was no one devastating incident that ruined marriage. Rather, it was the big backlog of missed birthdays, absences, broken promises, and the unanticipated effects of Richard's drinking. The affection which had brought them into one whole never quite disappeared, but fought to survive under disappointment and tiredness. After 12 years of marriage, by 1969, Elizabeth sued for divorce. For the 2016 public, it was another celebrity breakup. Richard was a lost cause. Its whole weight would not be seen till much later. He continued doing successful films, also continued to draw attention wherever he went, and continuing to live with the larger-than-life image that the spectators expected of him. But those closest to him saw there was a man under the bravado who never really got away from the implications of what had occurred. Unlike most ex-couples, Richard and Elizabeth was never public enemy. They had 3 kids, and eventually they established a partnership based on mutual regard, not animosity. Elizabeth hardly sought publicity, and liking to live a secluded life out of the limelight. Richard, for all his faults, remained deeply kept for his children and devoted to them. Interaction with his relatives as the years go by. As he went by, his perspective began to change. The confidence that had convinced him, he began to flee from every mistake, giving in to honesty. Interviews turned less about crazy exploits and more on thinking. Richard was no more Was bold as movie star and nothing else. He sounded increasingly manlike. Taking stock of a life that gave him about all he had dreamed about, while silently reminding him of all it had taken. Time has a means of altering the questions people asked themselves. When Richard Harris was young, he judged success in awards, leading roles, and the right to live just as he meant to do. As he became older, those measures began to shed some of their significance. All that left were the connections that had endured in the face of everything and the memories of those that didn't. One of the most important turning points in his later life did come when he decided to face his alcoholism. After years of excess, he entered treatment in the early 1980s and devoted himself to sobriety. It did not undo the damage that had already been done, but it enabled him to view his past with much clearer clarity. Friend Soyuro saw a calmer, more contemplative Richard, a man who could at last recognize that talent and celebrity had never shielded him from the repercussions of his own decisions. He never sought to rewrite history. Rather, he spoke with unexpected candor about the chances he had wasted and the agony his drinking had caused him. Though it was not Richard's habit to major public pronouncements regarding his first marriage, friends close to him known that Elizabeth continued on one of the defining characters of his life. She had been there pre-Oscar nominations, before Hollywood, before the headlines, before the world was made dubbing him a legend. That difference mattered. Richard was entered by several individuals. Harris's life after fame. Elizabeth was a chapter member when. Yet still everything was in doubt. Reputation was less important than belief. She had loved the young actor that was still struggling for a seat at the table. Not the international star he could later one of the most of the cinema's unforgettable characters. Their children often became the bridge that held the years of family connected. It made Richard very proud of Jared, Jamie and Damien going to great satisfaction of witnessing them build lives and occupations of their own. In many of methods, they made the ongoing connection that time or divorce could not remove. Before Richard Harris was shown to future generations as Harry Potter, Albus Dumbledore in the first two. Audiences viewed an older man in the Potter movies, whose overwhelming presence had softened into silent wisdom. Age had softened not his voice, not his charm, but it had obviously deepened his feeling of what was really important. When Richard Harris died in 2002, the showbiz at 72 world celebrated a wonderful career. Things has gone on for decades. They remembered the memorable performances, the recognizable voice, and the dauntless attitude that made him different from anyone else. But in the public tributes was another thing, a lot less glitzy and maybe far more significant. It was the tale of a young couple that once believed love could see them through anything. A tale of remarkable success which was associated with a price unexpected, and a man that achieved fame ultimately could fill theaters, get standing ovations, and establish a legacy that is admired around the planet it would never restore. The years lost with the one who had believed in him before everyone else. Maybe that's why Richard Harris Today, he remains an intriguing figure. Not because he had a perfect life, but because once he got the courage to recognize greatness upon the screen does not always mean happiness in the household. Sometimes the most profound. A legacy is not what a person leaves behind, found in the parts they've played, but in the silent teachings of their own lives. Teaches the best of Richard Harris. May have won him performance applause, but his greatest truth was far easier. Love is simplest to ignore, the most difficult to follow success. Replace it when it is gone. Richard Harris, actor, said once that you should live life entirely, and few would say that he more closely followed that philosophy, more passionately than many. He reached out. Failure and victory in equal ferocity, rarely playing it safe way. That preparedness to live without control made him unforgettable, but it did also left wounds that never really vanished. His story is a reminder that failure doesn't always bring regret to follow our aspirations. Sometimes it goes from carrying them out, only to discover that the individuals that mattered most softly went away as we looked in. In another way, Elizabeth Rhee Williams never became a Hollywood celebrity she didn't base her life on in front of the cameras or attention afterward. Their marriage was over, but her place in the narrative of Richard Harris was still unusual. She knew him before the stardom, before the applause, before the image of Cayman the bigger-than-life actor. She saw the eager young man for a long time, before the world paid homage to the legend. In the following years, Richard remained the object of admiration for outstanding performances, such introducing a whole new generation to his tender portrayal of Albus Dumbledore. His had wisdom in it. Eyes, but maybe some of that wisdom he'd made mistakes he'd earned could never reverse. No one can tell with certainty of the recollections that came back to him most frequently in his later years. You alone. The private, Richard Harris knew discussions he held with himself. Still, his readiness to recognize the expensive harm caused by alcoholism of the decisions he had taken evidenced a man who no longer judged success by the applause alone. That honesty might be one reason people hang around, admire him now. Never claimed to be having lived a blameless life. Rather, he was a demonstration of extraordinary talent. And deep imperfection may lie in same people. Richard Harris departed behind a phenomenal body of work, 3 loyal sons and performances that still thrill crowds around the world. But past the movies and accolades is yet another legacy, one that is less loud, but is long-lasting. It's the reminder that those who stand are beside us before we succeed, frequently the ones we understand best, obviously only in time. Thanks for watching. If Harris's story touched you, we'd love to hear what you think. Which of his performances has been with you the longest? And what aspect of his trip moved you the most? Share your memories in the comments below. And if you want stories exploring the lives, loves, and quiet regrets about Britain's most amazing stars, don't forget to like this video in common with the channel, and come along for the next story. Up until then, thank you for being here.